So the ACTU president here because members of the House of Representatives are here sitting in Canberra in what so far at least has been an unusually subdued start to the week, particularly if you compare it to last week. But there's still more than enough.
We'll fix that now.
OK, let's introduce the disembodied voices. There's still more than enough to rake over with our political panel. Jason Falinski, Liberal MP, and Labor's Andrew Leigh. They've made it, we'll let you in on a secret. Both have dashed into the studio from the House of Reps where there was an impromptu division keeping you on your toes. Let's roll straight into discussion about weaponisation of national security. I think we might have heard some more overtones of this today in Reps Question Time as we did at the end of last week. Firstly, to you, Andrew Leigh. This is not without foundation, is it, when we hear Peter Dutton and others trying to dial up national security concerns on Labor, when you consider the ASIO Director General's threat assessment last week, that is that all parties are vulnerable here?
We certainly know all parties are vulnerable, Greg, but it's very clear that there are no Labor candidates under concern from ASIO. Anthony Albanese has said as much as a result of discussions with the ASIO Director General. And we know that ramping up fear of conflict with China is counterproductive to Australia's national security interests.
If that's the case, Jason Falinski, why is Peter Dutton and others talking in these terms that Labor and Anthony Albanese might be the Chinese Communist Party's pick?
Well, I don't think even Peter Dutton's suggesting that, but Greg, feel free to say.
It was something very similar to that late last week.
But look, in truth, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. We know that. That shouldn't be news to anyone, certainly shouldn't be news to anyone in the Labor Party. And we have seen over and over again that foreign actors have tried to interfere and influence the outcome of our elections. We have some very good agencies in place that have, in some cases, come very close to not being able to avert it, but we have been able to avert it so far.
Including in your own party, you're confident that nothing untoward has slipped through undetected in the Liberal Party? I'm talking about exposure to donors, influence of pre-selection candidates.
So, Greg, in answer to your question, the foreign influence, getting rid of foreign influence out of our election campaign was something that the Turnbull government dealt with very strongly, against a lot of opposition. We saw the impact when Sam Dastyari was enticed to take a $400,000 donation over policy on the South China Sea. So we have seen this in the past. What Australians should know is that governments to date have responded by ensuring that those things are closed off.
Yeah, that is a factual reference, I suppose, to the Sam Dastyari case. But what about Andrew's point about divide and conquer here? That is, I think the Director General made it as well, that if we're tearing ourselves apart about potential and thwarted influence, that's akin to foreign interference anyway, doing the work of foreign interference.
What do you mean?
If it's being politicised in the way that it has been.
Well, the point of democracy is what makes democracy so resilient and so strong is their dynamism. It's not that everyone agrees with each other and that we actually tolerate dissent. That is what has made democracies and liberal democracies so strong over such a long period of time.
It must be disconcerting, Andrew, to see just how close, we don't know all the details, but on the ASIO Director General's account, to see just how close and perhaps even complex was this candidate interference attempt by Chinese interests that came to light on Friday. I mean, that cuts close to the bone for Labor, doesn't it?
Well, there's certainly attempts to influence elections that are going on, but I would prefer that Peter Dutton focused on his day job, and that would involve ensuring that we have a successor to the Collins-class submarine. Having a long-range submarine for Australia is crucial to our defence facilities. That had been expected to happen in the 2020s. Now, under Peter Dutton, it won't happen until the 2040s. That's a catastrophic failure of national security.
And under an Albanese government, have you got a best guess date for getting these boats in the water?
Look, we would certainly do our best to get them in there as quickly as possible, but the problem has been created under this government, and it is a serious national security problem. As Malcolm Turnbull has said, Peter Dutton is making the world more dangerous, not safer, by playing partisan politics with the China relationship.
And he, in turn, Peter Dutton, I think, well, you're in question time, Today, Jason was reminding everyone that Labor's defence spending had crashed below 2% to historically low levels under the Rudd government, I think was the historical reference. Again, the question is why? What's the upside in domestic politics towards throwing this stuff around?
Well, Greg, because it is disingenuous for the Labor Party to claim that Peter Dutton has made this world a less safe place, because this lack of preparation in terms of our national defence occurred under the Rudd-Gillard years when they invested record low amounts of money in national defence. Now, we have seen today that if we are not willing to have free and open discussion, we have seen that today with the exposure today of donations to independent candidates from coal mine interests.
This is Zali, just to be clear, this is Zali Steggall a couple of years ago, I think?
No, we're talking about, I'm not specifically pointing to a Member of Parliament, but we are talking about these campaigns, these pro-climate candidates running in a lot of seats around Australia have been taking money from coal interests that actually bought their coal mine from Eddie Obeid and then sought to divide those donations so that they wouldn't be declared by the Australian Electoral Commission. And this only came to light years later after an audit by the AEC, and it's been come out. If we do not have a well-informed electorate, then we can't have a well-informed democracy.
And where should that go is as far as it's too late for this Parliament to change anything, but with disclosure, with acceptance of donations.
We have made changes, and one of the reasons that the audit took place was because of a bill that the Liberal Party and the Labor Party voted for just towards the end of last year, which has made those audits possible by the AEC. If we hadn't changed the law, then maybe this donation still would be unrecorded and unknown.
So a system at work, Andrew Lee, this is, I mean, I'm using the Zali Steggall reference because that's how it's being reported publicly today as a case that looked at her donations regime a couple of years ago. Is that a system that's checking the boxes?
Oh, Greg, just before I come to that, I should say quickly, every time anyone hears Peter Dutton talking about defence spending, they have to remember that his defence spending includes the $4 billion he's paying to the French to not deliver a single submarine. On donations, it's important that we have more transparency in the system. The Hawke government introduced a $1,000 threshold in 1983. The Howard government took that up to what's now $14,000 in 2006. Labor would bring it down to $1,000. And we'd bring down the threshold for timely disclosure to 7 days, which would mean you couldn't have a situation such as you had with the former Prime Minister giving a $1.75 million donation, which wasn't disclosed for some 500 days. Labor's always stood for stronger transparency in donations disclosure. The Liberals have always stood against it.
So, Greg, let me ask Andrew this question. Will the Labor Party preference these pro-climate independents who have today been shown to be hiding where they have been receiving their funds? It's a simple yes or no question. If the Labor Party really is in favour of transparency, then surely they would have to put those sorts of candidates last on their list.
Jason, I don't do the preference deals for my party, as you well know.
Well, will you argue for them being put at the bottom?
But the reason that you're raising this issue, which was first reported last year, is that you're feeling under pressure in your seat,
Andrew,
because of your party's position on climate change.
Okay,
and that's why this issue has been
And the reason
brought up.
you are diverting to that is because you can't deal with the issue of the fact that we have today confirmation that people have been hiding donations. If the Labor Party is true to their principles, they would put them last on their preference.
As I understand it, Zali Steggall has amended her return. There's a question as to
after
whether...
an AEC audit.
Sure. There's a question as to whether a donation from 8 people consolidated into a single cheque is 8 donations or 1 donation. The AEC's asked something different. She's amended her return. That's as I understand it.
We've seen the limits of the Labor Party's transparency.
You would accept, wouldn't you, Andrew's point, Jason, that the reason you are exercised about this is that in your part of the world, these voices of candidates are...
Greg, I don't accept that at all. I want our democracy to operate as best as it possibly can. That requires to have a well-informed electorate. When you have people hiding things from the electorate, then you don't have a well-functioning democracy. Andrew and I were in a hearing on Thursday last week where we heard about how some industry super funds are one administrative error away from being insolvent. How we heard that up to $250 million has been transferred out of funds from hard-working Australians' retirement savings into the hands of trustees. None of this has been reported anywhere. APRA took very little action over that. All of that that's the sort of stuff that annoys me. you know, election, every 3 years I get to reapply for my job. I'm not going to be any different before or after that, other than the fact that I know I have to stand on my record and what I've been doing. What I want, and I would suspect, I thought every member of parliament wanted, is an open and transparent system. Now, if the Labor Party is true to their principles, then they will put candidates who have clearly not been transparent last.
All right, I'm pretty sure we're going to be having preferencing discussions in the weeks and months to come in great detail and at great length. But going to the question of electoral confidence, in and around you, you've had a state by-election and not that far from Andrew's seat either, Monero in New South Wales.
He's taking all the credit, I hear.
No, we'll ask him about that. But around the seat of Willoughby, a big kick in the pants for your own party. That's got to have you reflecting on your own political mortality.
Oh, sure. Look, the fact of the matter is that these decisions are made by the people of Australia. All you can do is the best job you possibly can do, and you have to let the cards fall where they may.
And how can you be certain that there's not some federal statement going on in that
Greg, the one thing that Andrew and I will definitely agree on is, in this business, nothing's certain.
Nothing's certain. All right. Well, you know, I know it's a different country. It's outside of the ACT and it's in New South Wales. But as you
seems like a different country.
As you look at Big, positive for Labor. As you look at Monero, less so. What were you picking up over the weekend in those by-elections?
Well, it's very strong support for the Labor team and resounding confirmation that Chris Minns's message is resonating with New South Wales voters. It was also very clear that Dominic Perrottet didn't want Scott Morrison anywhere near him. His basic view was take your race car driving, hairdresser pretending, ukulele playing selves, go and put them somewhere else. I'm not interested in being part of that. To the extent that Dominic Perrottet was speaking out against the religious discrimination bill last week. That's how strongly he didn't want Scott Morrison around. And it's a reflection that people are frustrated, Greg. They're frustrated with the fact that their wages are going down at the same time as prices are going up.
You don't think that cuts both ways as you look across the suite of seats? Strathfield, for instance, won by Labor again, but not as emphatically. I mean, are there statements being made there too about Anthony Albanese, if you want to wind Scott Morrison into this?
There's an incumbent effect there, but Jason Yatsen-Lee, I think, will rapidly build his own personal vote as his predecessor did in that electorate. And I should give a special shout out to Bryce Wilson, who worked incredibly hard in Monero, and I hope will pick up that seat for Labor at the next New South Wales.
All right, just a quick one, moving on from politics to breaking news. I think you might have heard on your trample towards the studio here from the House about
you know we were gazelle-like.
All right. About Dyson Hayden, the former High Court judge, now being the subject of a settlement payment undisclosed. Why does the taxpayer always have to be left carrying the can here for some of these workplace culture issues?
Greg, I absolutely agree with you. I have to say that I think that goes more broadly to workplaces generally. It seems...
You wouldn't expect it from the High Court though, would you?
You wouldn't expect that from anyone in any level of authority. We expect our leaders to set examples, not to be part of the problem. And I know what Andrew's going to say, which is that these things should be disclosed. And I think in this particular instance, he's absolutely right.
It was in the end. Yeah, it's a black stain on the court and its normally impeccable reputation.
Yeah, I think that's right, Greg. I was an associate to Justice Michael Kirby in the 1990s. I know how close that judge-associate relationship is and how much of a breach of trust these things were. So I think the government needs to provide a lot more transparency with the people who are paying the bills. The Australian taxpayer is paying the bills. This isn't Liberal Party money that's being given here.
So you want to hear publicly disclose the terms of the settlement?
I think we need a lot more transparency. The government is yet again trying to hide from scrutiny, as they have done with car park rorts, sports rorts, and their battle against an integrity commission. But instead, they need to recognise that transparency is a part of the very democratic values that Jason has been praising in this interview until now.
Very quickly and finally, Jason, on transparency and value for money, can you assure us we're getting good value for money out of the rep sitting this week? Because nothing you do there, apart from running over to our studios, for which we're very thankful, nothing you do there gets passed into law. This is a lame duck session of Parliament.
Oh, no, that's not... I mean, the Senate is back at the end of March. There will be some sitting days. I'm personally very hopeful that the mitochondrial donation laws will get passed by the Senate. We're dealing with a whole bunch of very important, which I brought in, pieces of legislation which may make it through the Senate.
They'd have to be lucky. They'd have to be lucky on
these
current
are questions,
time estimates.
These are questions of Senate efficiency, and as Dr. Lee and I will absolutely agree, they could do better.
All right, well, that's one thing you might choose to agree on in the interest of harmony. Jason Falinski and Andrew Lee, we're going to let both of you go and perhaps jog back,
Greg. Thanks,
if
Jason.
necessary, to the House of Reps.